Good afternoon, Mr. Sean Posey. Anthony Hake, Oak Hill Collaborative. So if you could, just introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Sean Posey. I'm a journalist, writer, regional historian. I'm the author of 3 books, basically a loose trilogy on the history of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley.
Incredible. And you recently released a book. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's called The Hidden History of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley, and a lot of it is about early 19th century or early 20th century Youngstown history and the Mahoning Valley history, but a lot of our chapters are about more obscure places and events in the valley that a lot of people might not be familiar with.
Okay, awesome. Do you find that history in Youngstown often becomes lost? And if so, why?
Yes. You could do a hidden or lost history for a lot of different places, but in a place like Youngstown, I think it's extremely relevant because the area's lost so much population. A lot of historical neighborhoods have depopulated. So a lot of the people who would normally pass down history through the generations are gone. Or the places that they might remember or talk about, just the infrastructure is totally gone. So it makes it a lot easier for important historical events and places to slip through the cracks, really, and kind of get lost to time in a way.
All right, well, it sounds like you're in the right business. So one thing that I'm incredibly curious about is what motivated you to target Youngstown specifically?
Well, in graduate school, I was a history major, and because it was graduate school, we had to do a lot of primary research for my thesis and also for several different classes where you just had to produce a research article. So what I would do, whether it be industrial history, I was studying a lot of industrial history, and more modern American urban history, I would just use Youngstown as an example. Because what I found out was Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley was so many rich examples of trends in American history that it was almost perfect for whatever class I was writing for. And all the research materials were right here at hand.
Let's start with what your most recent book focuses on. Can you tell us how it's different from Lost Youngstown?
It's different in a few senses. One is that it's about the entire Mahoning Valley. So Lost Youngstown, the first book, was just about the geographical city of Youngstown, and that's about it. Hidden History encompasses Trumbull County, Mahoning County, Youngstown, and surrounding area. So the first chapter is about the Spanish flu in the Mahoning Valley. And that actually goes into Ohio history too, because I talk about a few other places in Ohio and what was going on in the whole state. Because Youngstown was one of the worst hit cities in the country, large cities. And Ohio was severely affected as well, especially places like Chillicothe, where they had a big outbreak at a military barracks.
Okay. Needless to say, I'm excited to get my hands on it whenever I can. So it's interesting that you talk a lot about lost history, because we've identified a couple of sites right in the Oak Hill neighborhood that we would consider lost history, simply because the Mahoning Valley Historical Society has very little records on these sites ever existing. And in addition to this, we can't find any records online, which blows our mind because you would think everything's on the internet until it isn't. So one location that I'd like to bring attention to would be Reed's Arena. And could you tell us a little bit about Reed's Arena, starting with when it opened?
Reed's Arena probably opened in the early 1960s as the official title, Reed's Arena. That building was there for a very long time. It was a skating rink before that called Max. I don't know if it's called Max or just Max Skating Rink. And that probably, I'm not sure how far that goes back, but that building goes way, way back in time. So probably around 1962, 1963, Reed's Arena comes into being. So it goes from a roller skating rink, pretty much just or mostly used by the white community, to a roller skating rink with a black business owner serving a black clientele, but also at night, especially on the weekends, a music venue, part of like what they used to call the Chitlin circuit. So I'm not really talking about local acts, I'm talking about the biggest national acts coming through, especially R&B acts, and playing there. at night and on the evenings.
Could you list off a couple of the musicians?
Yeah, so Parliament Funkadelic, Marvin Gaye, Dionne Warwick, people of that stature. I mean, really, the biggest names.
So these are a lot of people that ended up at Reed's Arena because of the kind of crowd that Reed's Arena attracted. It was a mixed crowd, which
Right.
served to their benefit. Now, why did they perform at Reed's Arena and not other locations?
That's a good question. At the time, the early mid-1960s, urban renewal was going on in the city. There were a lot of venues that were disappearing, mostly because the neighborhoods they were in were being demolished. In 1965, the Elms Ballroom, which was on Elm Street, it's about where Kilcawley is today. So before Youngstown State branched out and kind of ate up that neighborhood there, the Elms Ballroom for decades served as a place where, on certain nights of the week anyway, black residents could go and hear music. And they also attracted a lot of black groups going all the way back to the swing era up until the rock and roll era. So everybody from Duke Ellington to James Brown. So in 1965, when the university, or the college, tore down the Elms Ballroom, that was a venue that was lost. So a lot of that business probably shifted over to Reed's Arena because there was still a demand to hear that type of music, especially in the mid '60s. But when you lose a venue like that, you get another one.
Right. And if you could put your finger on it, what would you say Reed's Arena had in regards to historical impact? Why should it be remembered today?
I think it should be remembered because it wasn't just a notable music venue as far as the type of caliber of acts it attracted, but it was also an important place in the black community and in the Lower South Side in general. So, as I mentioned, it was a skating rink. It was a place where kids could go, especially during a time still where there was a lot of lingering segregation in the community, so where black youth could go. It was also a place where people could go to hear great music, and it was also served as a community center. So in the late 60s, early 70s, when the African Cultural Weekend started, which was kind of a yearly celebration of African culture, they would also sometimes host speakers there at Reed's Arena, and also other events for the black community, like African American beauty pageants and things like that. So it was kind of a catch-all business, music venue, and community venue.
Okay, so it's a lot like the glue that held the community together. It was kind of like the mortar that held the bricks together, in a sense.
Yeah, it was a place for anybody who lived in that area during that time period would definitely remember going to and being an important part of the cultural fabric of the Lower South Side in the 1960s and early 1970s.
So it's very interesting that there's so much about Reed's Arena that almost went undocumented, yet it proved to be an important historical site in not just the Black Youngstown Southside community, but just in Youngstown history in general. Another site that is similarly lost to time would be the Casablanca Nightclub, which is where the Foursquare Gardens green spot is today. I just have some questions about the Casablanca Nightclub, and let's start with, when was it opened?
Probably around 1961, 1962. It had made, I think I found ads going back at least that far. Probably when it made the transition. Would make sense from a historical standpoint because by the early 60s, the Lower South Side, which had a lot of redlining, was starting to transition into a primarily African-American neighborhood. So that would have made sense for business like that to come about during that time period.
Okay. And the Casablanca Nightclub was also a part of this Chitlin circuit. Interestingly enough, it's not on the Wikipedia page for Chitlin circuit. So what generated that kind of hearsay? What made it the Chitlin circuit?
I talked to a lot of people who had expressly told me that and had been to shows there and talked a little bit about the Chitlin circuit, kind of informal too. And once again, unfortunately, like a lot of things in black history, not terribly well documented in a lot of areas. You could probably speak a lot more specifically about it in, say, like Cleveland or Detroit, someplace like that, but less so here. And there were definitely the type of acts that were Chitlin Circuit acts that came and played there. It was primarily an African-American club, and, it was during a time where there were still clubs in the area that would not admit African-Americans to actually inside them as patrons, though they could play at various different places. So it would have been that type of place.
So it wasn't like being a part of the Chitlin Circuit was necessarily a badge of honor. It was more so, these are the kinds of people we allow for the time.
Yeah, I guess probably now maybe some people would say it was a badge of honor. I don't know how people thought about it at the time. It was just we talk about the Chitlin Circuit, you talk about just a series of venues where you could really see the best of, black music at that time period, during a time period where there was still segregation going on.
And whenever I bring up the Casablanca Nightclub, it seems to be during that era where if somebody knew about it, they have either passed away by today or they're kind of tight-lipped about it, as in they want to talk about it but can't. Do you think there's a reason for that?
I did a number of years ago. I talked to a few people in detail about the Casablanca, older African Americans, some of whom might have passed away by now. And I think part of what you're talking about is a lot of, as we were mentioning earlier, a lot of African American history has not been covered or has been dismissed. And I think there's probably still a lingering hesitancy among some people to see a club that they might have enjoyed and think was an important place either slandered or misrepresented by, an outsider.
Okay.
That would be my guess.
That's an astute guess. Now let's challenge that stigma by recounting some of the things that Casablanca was known for. Like Reed's Arena, it was a popular venue for artists. Do you know of a few of the artists that performed there?
Yeah, there were national acts and local acts. So local acts, people like a guy by the name of Stage, Harold Hardwick, I believe was his real name, who was a real noted organist, Hump Jones, a lot of names that people wouldn't recognize today unless you were of a certain age. A lot of R&B, and the best R&B and jazz musicians in the area would have played at the Casablanca, but also groups like the OJs. Wilson Pickett played there. Aretha Franklin sang there in 1963 when she was still kind of primarily known as a jazz singer before she had made that transition. So yeah, that was also a place where there was local talent, and then some of the best national talent around also had come and played there as well.
All right. And can you speak a little bit to what happened to the Casablanca? Because when we go looking for it today, all we see now is a four-square block watch sign and a lot of green space. If it's such a popular nightclub, how did it meet its end?
Well, of course, 1977 Black Monday, right? So the mills start closing in the late 70s and early 80s, and the closings of the mills had all kinds of economic repercussions that most people are aware of. But one thing that happened was that the Lower South Side really depopulated, and a lot of the cornerstone businesses closed. And a lot of the buildings were torn down or burned down. The Casablanca transitioned to another club, I'm going to say about 1982 or 1983. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that ownership switched hands, but it definitely became a different club during that time period. And that lingered on to the 1990s, and I believe it was torn down in 2007. In fact, I found out about the Casablanca when I was reading an article in the Columbus Dispatch, I believe it is, and it was an article about Youngstown, and they were actually interviewing a guy in front of the demolished ruins of the Casablanca, and he had mentioned, this used to be a really big nightclub, and here's the acts I saw here, and I had never heard of it myself, and I was kind of astonished that a place like that had been on Oak Hill. I didn't know that, there were any clubs over there. So that was actually what led me into investigating the history of it. Just this little snippet that I saw in an article in a Columbus newspaper.
And it's funny how not just one, but two major venues brought such big names in music, R&B and jazz specifically. So when you stumble upon a relic like that, you almost become shocked that you don't have more information about this. Shocked that you haven't found something about this already. That finding out about it when it's demolished, it almost feels like you're too late. And so that is part of the reason why we want to record this, is to kind of capture that snapshot in time before it's too late. So any final comments, Mr. Posey?
Yeah, you know, I would, as somebody who has done research on quote-unquote lost places in the Youngstown area, and especially African-American cultural touchstones, there's a real dearth of information. It's very difficult to find out information. A lot of places are, as you've mentioned, almost lost to time. A lot of the people who remember them are gone, they're dispersed, or they've passed away, so it's a difficult area to research, but it's important because, as we've talked about here, there are so many iconic cultural places in Youngstown that fall into that category that deserve to be remembered.
All right, and thank you for your time, Mr. Sean Posey.
Hey, thanks.
And for those of you watching, please check out his book, Hidden History of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley. If you can't see the cover, there's the title. Mr. Sean Posey, thank you for sitting down and having this talk with us.
Thank you.